Hey everybody. So, you've been doing the gut health things, genuinely doing them, not half-heartedly. Probiotics, real fiber intake, maybe you've gotten into fermented foods, maybe you cut back on the ultra-processed stuff a couple of years ago and you never looked back. Well, it worked, right? It worked for a while. Digestion evened out. You felt like you understood your own body a little better than you used to. And then, somewhere in the last year or two, without changing anything about that routine, your hormone symptoms started creeping back, started coming back, or showing up in a way they hadn't before. The bloating that used to respond to a probiotic doesn't respond the way it used to. The mood swings, the mood swings feel less connected to anything that you can point to. Just crazy, feeling crazy, right? You're doing the exact same things that used to help, and they're just helping less than they used to, right? Listen, if that is confusing because you didn't do anything wrong and you didn't stop doing the thing that worked, right? I want you to sit with this for a second, okay? The terrain your gut habits are working on has been quietly changing underneath them, even while the habits themselves stayed exactly the same. Today, I want to show you exactly what's changing and why it works as a loop, okay? Each side quietly feeding the other. Because once you can see the loop, when you can see it, a few things about this pattern stop being confusing. That's the piece I call gut hormone disconnected. And by the end of today, I'm hoping that you will understand. I hope you will understand not just what it is, but why it tends to show up later than the other patterns we've covered in July, this month. And why good gut habits alone don't always keep pace with it as your hormones shift. These patterns, y'all, including gut hormone disconnected, I just want to put it out there. These are educational frameworks for nutritional awareness. They are not medical diagnoses. All right? So let's get into it, y'all. Let's start with a piece almost nobody talks about. Okay? Estrogen does not just get processed by your gut. It actually helps shape your gut microbiome in the first place. Research points to estrogen playing a real role in gut microbial diversity, supporting the mucosal lining, influencing which bacterial populations thrive, generally helping maintain a more diverse, resilient microbiome. Now, for a lot of women, that relationship runs quietly in the background for decades without ever needing to be named because estrogen, the levels are relatively steady, and the gut is just doing its job underneath all of it unnoticed. Welcome to Wind Down Wednesday, even though it's Friday. Now here's a piece that's specific to your gut specifically. There's a particular collection of gut bacteria, researchers call it the estrobolome, that produces an enzyme called beta-glucuronidase. That enzyme's job is to take estrogen that your liver has already packaged up for excretion and unpackage it again, which allows some of it to be reabsorbed back into circulation instead of leaving the body. Now, in a well-functioning system, that's actually useful. It's part of how your body keeps a small, steady reserve of estrogen in circulation rather than clearing every bit of it out immediately. Now, we actually did touch on this a few weeks ago. The video is there if you want to go back and watch it. We talked about Estrogen-Stuck, okay? And how for a lot of women, that reabsorption process runs a little too efficiently, so more estrogen recirculates than the body actually needs, and it builds up. So today, we're going one layer deeper because that's only half of what's actually happening. Now, here's the part almost nobody connects. As estrogen naturally declines through perimenopause, The same microbial populations that depend on estrogen support, the ones estrogen was helping maintain, can start to shrink and lose diversity right along with it. Research on this is still developing, but what it points to is a genuine feedback loop. Lower estrogen can mean a less diverse, less resilient estrobolome, and a less diverse, less resilient estrobolome tends to produce less consistent beta-glucuronidase activity, which means estrogen metabolism becomes less predictable. Not always more, not always less, just less steady, more erratic. That erratic quality is a big part of why perimenopause symptoms can feel so inconsistent from month to month, even when nothing about your life or your habits has changed. Your gut is trying to do a shifting job with fewer of the tools it used to have for it month to month. And this is the loop stated plainly, okay? Declining estrogen can shrink and destabilize the estrobolome. A shrinking, destabilized estrobolome makes estrogen metabolism less predictable. Less predictable estrogen metabolism adds more instability on top of an already declining, already fluctuating hormonal picture. Each side of that loop is quietly feeding the other, which is part of why this pattern rarely shows up as one clean issue. It can touch digestion, mood, energy, and your cycle all at once without tracing back neatly to a single archetype. Now, a woman I worked with earlier this year is a good example of exactly this loop. She'd been genuinely committed to her gut health, y'all, for years. Real fiber intake, a rotation of fermented foods. She'd even worked with someone years earlier to rebuild her gut after a rough stretch of antibiotics. And it had worked. Digestion had been stable and predictable for a long stretch. Then, over about a year and a half, things started shifting again, even though nothing about her routine had changed. Bloating that came and went unpredictably instead of following any pattern that she could track. Mood that swung in a way that didn't line up with her cycle the way it once had. Fatigue that wasn't tied to sleep. Now, she told me it felt like her own body had started speaking a language she used to understand, and suddenly she didn't. And I'm thinking that probably some of you here can relate to that. She'd had her hormones checked. Estrogen came back within a wide normal range. Nothing flagged as concerning. Her gut health, by every marker she tracked herself, looked fine on paper also. 2 systems, each individually unremarkable, and she still didn't feel like herself in either one. Now, what we found was the relationships between the 2 systems, specifically the loop we just walked through. Her estrobolome's diversity had genuinely narrowed compared to where it had been years earlier, likely tracking her declining estrogen, and that narrowing was part of what was making her estrogen metabolism swing unpredictably rather than run the steady, boring background process that it used to be. Once we worked with rebuilding that microbial diversity directly, targeting specifically the piece that had quietly eroded, since most of her existing foundation was already solid, her bloating became noticeably more predictable within about 6 weeks. And the mood swings eased further over a couple of months after that. Now, I'm sharing that anonymized, but the shape of it, good gut habits that used to work, quietly losing ground as hormones shift for reasons that were never about effort, is genuinely common in the community of women that I work with. So, if part of your gut's microbiome's job is shifting as your estrogen shifts, what actually helps? All right, first piece is diversity. specifically. Not just more fiber, but more different kinds of fiber from as wide a range of plant sources as you can reasonably manage. Different fiber types feed different bacterial populations. And a narrow diet, even a genuinely high fiber one, tends to support a narrower microbiome. Now, this matters more now than it did, say, 10 years ago, because you're trying to maintain diversity against a hormonal headwind that's working to narrow it on its own. The second piece, fermented foods, consistently, not occasionally. We're talking yogurt, kefir, sauerkraut, kimchi, whatever you'll actually eat regularly. Since consistency matters more than any one specific food, okay? These introduce live bacterial populations directly, which is particularly useful when your body's own capacity to maintain that diversity is under some strain. The third piece is cruciferous vegetables like broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, cabbage. Research points to compounds in these vegetables supporting the liver's estrogen metabolism pathways, which works alongside the gut piece rather than replacing it. Think of it as supporting the process at an earlier stage before it ever reaches your gut's part of the job. And the fourth piece, the one people don't expect, protecting the diversity you already have, not just adding more. That means being genuinely thoughtful about unnecessary antibiotic use when there's a reasonable alternative worth discussing with your prescriber. And it means noticing if alcohol has crept up, since regular higher intake is one of the more consistent disruptors of gut microbial diversity in the research. Now, none of these four pieces works as a single technique you do once. They work as an ongoing pattern because you're not fixing a one-time problem. You are supporting a system that's going to keep shifting as your hormones keep shifting for the rest of this transition and beyond it. Now, y'all, I would love to hear from you directly. Two things. Y'all know I do this all the time, right? I want you to drop it in the comments. And if you're in our community, drop it in our chat. The first thing is, has something that used to reliably help your gut or your symptoms stopped working as well as it used to, even though you haven't changed anything? And then number two, this one's for today, since it is our last session of the month of July. Okay. Of everything we've covered these 5 Wednesdays, and today is Friday, I know. We covered the cortisol curve, estrogen clearance, thyroid conversion, cortisol as the hub underneath everything, and today's gut hormone loop. Which one finally gave a name to something you've been living with the longest? Just post it in the comments, y'all. I'll read all of it. Y'all, so here's where today's mechanism actually sits inside everything that we've built the month of July, this month. Nervous system, then rhythm, then nourishment. That's the order my tri-shift method runs in. And we spent our very first session, first video, first week of July on the first axis. Today we're closing out July, this month. We're finally on the third axis, nourishment. And there's a reason it is sequenced last instead of first. Even though today's mechanism might feel like it should come first, given how foundational gut health sounds. The gut hormone loop that we walk through today needs a stable nervous system and a rebuilt rhythm underneath it to actually hold. You can support microbial diversity carefully and still see inconsistent results if your cortisol curve is still spiking at 1 a.m, or if your body's basic daily rhythm is still fighting itself. Nourishment is real and it is necessary. It is the axis that finishes the job the first 2 axes make possible. And that's really the thread, y'all, that is running through this entire month of July. Now, if you zoom all the way out, every pattern that we've covered together traces back to the same 3 axes, addressed in the same order regardless of which symptom happens to be loudest for you. Y'all, if you haven't taken my free quiz yet, that is actually the first place to start. Takes about 4 minutes, and it tells you where you actually sit before anything else here makes sense for you. And as always, y'all, the link is going to be in the description below, in the below this video. If today's description sounded like your own life, gut habits that used to work, quietly losing ground for reasons that were never about effort, here's where I'm going to leave this. Your body is operating by new rules right now. And my tri-shift protocol is how you learn what they are for your specific pattern. Okay? So I want to thank all of y'all for being here, y'all, for the month. If you haven't, if you just joined, go back and watch my videos. I do drop them every Wednesday, and every question that you drop in the community, I read it, y'all. That's genuinely what makes this group work. Y'all, listen, this is our last Wind Down Wednesday for July. But our free circle that's online keeps going every day in between. And I'll see you back here soon for whatever we build next in the month of August. If you are leaving today with more questions than you came in with, I want to tell you that usually means that something landed. Drop your questions in the comments or in our community. I read them all. Do good work, y'all, and take care of yourself. Talk to you soon.